Aye, kuwe kuwa maduwe.
Aye, kuwe maduwe.
Aye, kuwe kuwa maduwe.
Aye, kuwe maduwe.
Could you please state your name?
My name is Ronald Cole Bridgeforth. My mother named me Ronald. I named myself Cole. Cole is my preference.
Thank you. Well, starting off with that, get to know Baba Cole. We're going to start from the beginning. So the first question is, where did you grow up?
Okay. I grew up in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, a little small town in Mississippi Delta. When I was growing up, the population was about 60,000 people. A town that, you know, if you think about the stereotypes of the South, it would be that. You would sort of think about like, yeah, well, white folks, you know, control the town's politics, made money on the cotton industry and soybeans, and, you know, farming and agriculture was a big thing when I was growing up. But I also, you know, would push back against that stereotype because I grew up in a very embracing, loving Black community. Both my parents are from the South. My dad's from Monroe, Louisiana. My mother's from Pine Bluff. And when they were younger, they both got involved in churches as an example of the kind of community that was there. My mom grew up in and was a member of the same church for her entire life, for 80 years, the Highland Missionary Baptist Church. My dad came to town as a musician, went to school in Pine Bluff at the historically Black college, University of Arkansas Pine Bluff is what it's called now. Back then it was Arkansas A.M.N.N., agricultural, mechanical, and normal. And normal means it's an education, a school for teachers. But my dad was a musician, minister of music at Damascus Missionary Baptist Church across town. And so I grew up in a two-church family. I had choices. I could either choose my mom's church or my dad's church on any given Sunday. Although I was pretty active in Sunday school program at the church I grew up in, so I was pretty much there all the time. But it was a very loving, embracing community. I was in and around the college community quite a bit. So I got a chance to be exposed to the art and culture, fraternities and sororities, so step shows and homecoming weekend where you had a parade and the marching bands would come and battle from Southern and Grambling and FAMU. Wow. I grew up in a place where schools were segregated until I was in the 6th grade. So, you know, but we had these very well-prepared teachers and principals, and the people who worked in the cafeteria, you know, these are all Black people who cared about us, who said, you can be anything that you work hard to be that's, you know, has a good and righteous intention behind it in terms of serving the world. I learned a lot about community service where I grew up. People were always, if you had somebody had a fire in their home or some other tragedy, people would join together and take food and money and, you know, support them. And so the connections to each other, the kind of connections that we had with each other have really been a model for how I've tried to be here in Oakland. But it was, again, a kind of strong Black community feel around everything, that people knew who you were, that people encouraged you when you deserved encouragement, encouraged you with some threat of punishment if you didn't do what you were supposed to be doing. I'm gonna tell your mama, you know, and everybody knew your parents in my community. When I went to school, we went to segregated schools until I was in the 6th grade. And so I went to school with all Black teachers, all Black kids, Black principals, Black coaches, you know, Black cafeteria workers. So you felt a sense of belonging. Like you felt a sense that whatever was happening in the bigger world was okay because you had this group of people around you. I grew up in a historically Black college town, University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, which is where both my parents are alum. My parents are the first college educated people in our family. But if you were in and around the university, you were exposed to art, you were exposed to speakers, like during homecoming, people would come from other places. The year before I was born, Martin Luther King Jr. was the keynote speaker for the graduation. Wow. And because he was invited by the Black president, Lawrence Davis, who started, he was one of the youngest college presidents in the country when he got that job. But he invited Dr. King, and when the segregationists like Oral Babas, who was the governor at the time, and the board of the school was all these white men. They basically punished Lawrence Davis for inviting Dr. King. They said, you can't invite him, he's a rabble rouser, he's causing trouble. And this is like 1959. And Dr. Davis relented. He was like, no, I'm inviting who I want to invite. But the way they tried to punish him was they withheld the university's budget for almost 2 years. trying to say that, we got control over this, right? So I grew up in a place where there was a certain amount of resilience. You had, when I was growing up, I was too young to participate, but SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, had a strong presence in Pine Bluff. There was a man named Mr. Yancey who owned a furniture store, who was the only person who would actually give those students who were struggling around our freedom a place to sleep, because everybody else was afraid, or a lot of people were afraid. And so Mr. Yancey became sort of a local hero around civil rights movement. And it was a great lesson because he was an independent black businessman who didn't fear, and his business came from the black community, so he didn't fear for any kind of payback from the white community. So I grew up around people who were conscious of our situation in America, who were conscious of their blackness, who were conscious of their spirituality, who were conscious of the need to encourage young people to be their highest self. And so I feel blessed. I grew up in that kind of a place. And so for me, when schools desegregated when I was in the 6th grade, we never had that sense of, oh, we need to be around white kids to feel smarter, or we need to be around white teachers to do better, because frankly, our teachers were better prepared because they had mostly gone to the local university. Some of the white teachers had barely gotten out of college. We had people who were PhDs in their field teaching in high school, and it's the odd paradox of segregation. They couldn't get jobs in white America. They couldn't get jobs at the University of Arkansas. They couldn't get research positions if they were chemists. So they ended up teaching high school. So we had some of the best equipped, best trained teachers and ministers and social workers and all these people that were around us. And so when things began to change after desegregation, when we had all black park, all black swimming pool, we would go to the movie theaters. Yeah, the movie theaters were segregated, but black kids would sit up in the balcony. So it was all black kids in the balcony, and we was throwing popcorn and ice over on the heads of the white kids and mess with them. But it was a very rich place to grow up. And the more I think about it as an adult here in Oakland, that's the sense of community that I've been working to try to recreate. That's what I want us to have, here. Not necessarily in a segregated society, but in a society that values blackness, in a society that values our culture, that values who we are as human beings.
So the first question is, where did you grow up?
Grew up in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay. What was that like when you were growing up? Did you live there for your whole life? Well, not obviously your whole life, but your adult life, and what was that?
Yeah, I left Cleveland at 18.
Okay.
When I went to Michigan State University for undergrad. But yeah, I mean, that was my home. That's where I was born and raised. That's where I came of age. But yeah, at 18, I was out. I haven't been living there since.
Okay. What was it like in the community that you grew up in?
Cleveland is a very interesting place. My thoughts about it now, looking back on it, are different than when I lived there. Right, like growing up, I didn't have a sense of the world and how things worked. So I never really understood a lot of things growing up until I got older and began to do research and understand why things were the way they were. But for me personally, I was a part of a really big family. My grandma and my grandfather on my mom's side had 13 children.
Oh, wow.
My mom being one of them. They were all from Tennessee. She was born in Nashville, and then they moved up here. And for me growing up, it was really all about family. I that's who I played with. I had like 50 first cousins, all of the ones that were in, a 5-year age group. It's probably 20 of us, and we're like brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. So a lot of time I was at grandma's house or at an auntie's house, or cousins would be at my house. I had like some friends outside of my family, but not many. So it was really about my family. So for me, growing up in Cleveland was really about that. It was a lot about family. But we were very poor too. And so some of those things really stick out to me. Just not having certain things growing up, being food insecure. I think that's the biggest thing that stuck with me from growing up in Cleveland is the poverty and the segregation. It's a very, very segregated city. On paper, it looks diverse in numbers. When I was growing up, it was like almost 50% black, 50% white. Wow. However, literally 99% of all the black people live on the east side. And then the west side is a little mixed, but overwhelmingly white. So really growing up in Cleveland was really about only being able to like kind of move about freely in a certain area of the city. And then when we go to other places in the suburbs or other parts that were outside of the hood, you know, that's where we get racial profile. That's where, you know, people would, you know, be mean to us, you know, and basically make us know that we weren't really welcome on that side of town.
Wow.
So a lot of confusing things growing up.
I can imagine. And just experiencing that, what was it like when you were going to school? Was that the segregation still in play in terms of, you know, the other people that were in your school in terms of fighting? Was that something, or was it, you know, different? Well,
yeah, you know, for most of the schools on the east side, they're all black, right? But I did have an experience in, what was it, 5th grade, 6th grade? Yeah, about 6th grade, I got into a gifted and talented program. Mm-hmm. And their idea it was 2 schools in Cleveland that were, quote unquote, for gifted and talented students. And one was Whitney Young, and the other one was Wilbur Wright Middle School. Okay. And both of them was far away from where I lived. But a group of, you know, kids on the east side, we got bused. It was like an hour bus ride to the west side. And that's where I went to middle school in Wilbur Wright. And the racial dynamics were terrible. Mm-hmm. Because you had a group of like young, you know, middle school black kids coming from the east side, mm-hmm. where we don't interact with white people at all. You know, the only white people we ever see are teachers and police. That's all. Mm. And so going over to the west side, it was just very interesting because this school had a large Latino population too, a large Mexican American population, and some white students as well. But we were this group of supposedly just very intelligent black kids from the hood in the school with these other races. But we were segregated in the school. Like we went to our own classes, and they called us the gifted and talented program, and they said the other kids were in regular education. So it was just a very weird dynamic. You know, we were going to school with these other kids, but they weren't in our classes, and we weren't in their classes. So it set up this really interesting racial beef at the school because not only are we black kids from the east side, but in the school, we're the smartest kids according to, you know, the test or whatever, right? So they really didn't like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, they were like, who are these kids coming from the east side? And they're all ghetto, right? But then we're getting treated special because we're so-called gifted and talented. Mm-hmm. So we actually had a lot of fights across race. It was my first encounter with, I guess, you know, I don't know if I call it racial riots, you know what I'm saying? But we definitely had race fights in middle school. And yeah, it was weird. It was weird.
Wow. And just based off of a lot of these kind of experiences, I was going to ask, like, what are some lessons you've learned about black society just as you were coming up and you know, the experiences that you mentioned when you were in college and, you know, all that? What have you learned?
Well, that's a good question. Like I said before, I've learned that, you know, as I've gotten older, that manhood is not defined by how the street defines it, mm-hmm. or how strong you are, your inability to be like a little softer, a little more gentler, you know, have a heart and show that your heart is okay with all that stuff. You know, so I've learned that was not a good way to be. You know what I'm saying?
That what you're describing, that's a journey. That's an entire process. It's not just a clear path. Yeah. I think for anyone, even doesn't necessarily even have to be what, you know, your background was growing up. It could, you know, you can get trauma from all different types of places. So.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I'm going to speak on that for a minute because, I mean, I must have been, like, I'm 69 years old, right? So I must have been in my early 50s or middle 50s when I was really had to admit or feel that I was traumatized. Because in my neighborhood and where I grew up, that was just normal living. That's just how things went down. You know what I'm saying? But I was in this trauma-informed care training with Alameda County Probation Department because I was working at the facility and they required that you do this training, right? And they had us in this table and they had us talking about, they had some script they gave us. They gave us a little, you know, it's like you know, these table talks. And there was like several tables in the room, and they had people broken up into little groups. And our group had a family, and they chose me as the guy that was troublesome. I don't know how it happened, but it just happened to happen. And so we did our little dialogue, and we talked about it. And then at some point, they asked us to share out, you know, what was the experience like talking about that family? And the group chose me to speak. And when I got up to talk, I got emotional because I felt the trauma. I felt it. And I was like, man, I was traumatized. And I didn't realize it because around me, that was normal living. That's just normal how people just how the world is, you know?
Yeah.
Dudes be beating their moms, they folks, and folks supposed to be fighting, and people using drugs, everyday life. So now I kind of realize that there's some trauma involved.
Yeah, no, it's good that you at least had a place where you can recognize that and be able to unpack that, so it's not a cloud that's over you that you're not sure why.
Exactly.
You know, because that carries into all the different other parts of your life, and you don't necessarily realize what's this coming from. Why why I'm already in defense mode if someone looks at me too long, like that type of that thing. And that's it's a lot of that's just from, like you say, just growing up and just having responding differently than just reacting. So, which I think is, that's excellent. I'm glad you were able to, make that transition. That's really important. I'm sure this question would have been different if I asked you, say, in the 60s, but right now, what would you say, what does it mean to be black in America? What does it mean to you now?
It's to be, have a double consciousness, not in the way the Du Bois looked at it, but in the way that, for me, it's to live with love and rage simultaneously. The thing I left Mississippi with was rage. And they were going to draft me, I was, and all that stuff, and I didn't want to go to Vietnam, and it was just madness. But they reclassified me and said, we don't want you in Vietnam. Smart decision for them and me. But I was pretty much, all through my 20s, just angry. I'm really pissed. What happened in Mississippi was we went to the Atlantic City Democratic Convention in 1964 in August. And that's where the Freedom Democratic Party of Mississippi, which was biracial, integrated, led by a sister by the name of Fannie Lou Hamer, made her famous appeal to the Credentials Committee of the Democratic Convention and said, look, your rules say that you will not seat segregated state parties. And the Mississippi Party is all white. We are integrated. You should seat us. And Lyndon Johnson said, if I seat the Negroes from Mississippi, I'm going to lose the Southern vote, and I won't be president the next time around. So they cut a deal. They offered 2 seats to their party, and Fannie Lou Hamer said, we didn't come here for no 2 seats. And so we were rebuffed. But in my young brain, 19 and 20, it's like, we've done everything that you said we should do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you say, yeah, but. So a lot of us left the South really disillusioned. People went in their different directions. I went to embracing armed revolution. So during my 20s, I was pretty much angry and enraged. And walking on the edge of staying alive, I really, I had a lot of idealism, about, I'd be willing to trade my life if we could free my people. Yeah. It ain't that simple, though. Mm. And it wasn't until my first son was born, in 73, and I was about 29, that I came to grips with life, because that wasn't just me anymore. Now, I'll digress a bit. I met my biological father in 2015. He was already in his 90s.
Wow.
Very successful, PhD in math, taught at a black college down there in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where my mother had gone to school as a high schooler. His absence in my life was a determinant for me. It shaped my journey as much as anything he could have done if had he been present. Not knowing my father was extraordinarily painful for me. I can't even emphasize how painful it was, because I shut it off for years. Didn't matter. It did matter.
Yeah.
And I meet young men now who say, it don't matter. I say, it might. It might not matter. I can't tell you what it does for you. It mattered for me. So when my son was born, I came to a full stop. And I said, I don't want my child to experience the pain that I experienced of growing up without a father. And for that reason, I made 2 critical decisions, and I made a promise to him that I was going to stay alive, and stay out of jail. And that I meant I had to live my life differently. And whatever pipe dreams I had about dying in the revolution and all that, get that. Stay alive, stay out of jail. And I told him. He saved my life because he gave me a reason to live.
Wow.
So that took me to my 20s. Now I got 2 sons, and decided, okay, you're smart. I'm moving furniture for a living. And it's like, that's a pack animal. So I guess I need to go back to school. So I went to school. I went back to where my grandfather would have had me go, which is become an educator.
Okay.
And it fits quite naturally with me.
I'm sure that had a big impact, not just because you making the conscious decision to further education, and again, it's not just you anymore. It's the family now. So it's like you seeing the larger implications of that, and just moving forward, like how can I take care of them in a more holistic way, and in a better situation. And especially if you're doing a lot of things regarding moving furniture or things that becomes a big burden physically. Eventually, you can have back issues and all those things to go along with that.
Yeah, I was very clear about that. It would be remiss of me not to mention that I've been married for 50 years. Probably more, to do the counting. But yeah, over 50 years. And I blame my wife for that, because I was a serious fool for most of my 20s and 30s, just a fool. And she hung in there with me. And I credit her along with my sons, for why I get to sit here now. I don't know if she ever regrets it, but what can I say? It's what she made. And I've tried to be a good husband. I was married before that. It was my second marriage. The first marriage I screwed up. I just messed up. I wasn't ready to be married, and acted, showed it. So, but one thing I learned from that was I never wanted to hurt anybody that bad again. And so the second time I tried, I'm like, this is for life.
It's fine. I hear that. Yeah, it's a big part of experiences is just learning from whatever past mistakes or just ways you could have made a decision differently. As you said, it's just impacting you in a way and said, I don't want to go this route again. And really following up on that and having it as a determinant for you moving forward to moving to the next stage of your life. So it sounds like that. That experience, especially being married the first time, was, just kind of also helped to kind of lead you on the path to the life that you have now. A big one. So,
Fair enough.
Yeah. a lot of questions come up just around how strong the link is, not just from Oakland in the South, just migrations, things that's happened, but also all the legacy and the history of African Americans in Oakland and things like that. But let's take it in a more broader sense. Around that, what would you say being black in America, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it means that you are from good stock, if I could say it that way. It means that you are from a group of people who have been some of the most resilient people in human history to deal with our experience of enslavement and come out of it, and a couple hundred years later still be here. Just to still be here, to have survived it. And then you add to that survival to thrive, to be good at things, to be great at things. I think I'm proud to be black. I'm proud to be an African descent person. I'm proud to be an African, because and especially our experience in this country has shown that we could get through some of the toughest times on plantations during the period of sharecropping and convict leasing and the lynchings, all of the terrible things that have happened to us. We have risen above those things for the most part. And I think that being here, we're here for a reason. We're here to show ourselves, we're here to show the rest of humanity that what it means to really be human, to really be able to do this and not be bitter most of the time, not be angry most of the time, to be able to have black joy, to be able to still have an aspiration of liberation. That for me, I don't see other people having had to deal with it in quite the same way. The Native American experience is what it is. The Asian American experience is what it is. The poor white experience, if you were Irish and you came here. But our experience is very unique. That the way that we have been the cultural innovators. Like when you think about American music, there would really be no American music if it wasn't for black people. If you didn't have jazz, if you didn't have R&B, hip hop, field songs, soul, even country and western. I got a friend who lives here, Miko Marks, who's an amazing country western singer. I ain't that crazy about country western, but she can sing, And so I think it's an example of how our culinary arts has influenced the country, like how we eat, right? How we play in terms of the minute you give black people a glove, a ball, a bat, a gymnastics floor, a tennis court, we're going to excel at it. We're just going to get good at it, And when I think about the the Williams sisters, when I think about Tiger Woods, when I think about we get these conversations about who's the greatest basketball player of all time. We talking about Michael Jordan. We talking about LeBron. We talking about Kobe. We're not talking about Jerry West, as good as he was. We're not talking about Rick Barry. So almost in any field of endeavor, in the sciences, in journalism, in politics, we've done extraordinary things. And so I think being black in America means being excellent. It means being joyful. It means being an activist. It means being liberatory. It means caring about the environment. And I think that even with some of the dysfunction that we see in our community, those are the things that give me hope about who we are. Those are the things that give me encouragement about what I think is possible for my new granddaughter, what I think is possible for your children. Yeah.
I heard that. And I'm curious, as you were speaking as well about the segregation and just as you were growing up, seeing kind of this stark difference, not just from racially, but also in kind of the economic class, and mentioning, being poor when you're growing up. How did that frame, I guess, your idea about being black in America? What does being black mean to you?
It's something that is always changing in my psyche and how I view things. If you would have asked me this growing up in Cleveland, I would have a very different answer. But for me, at this point in my life, being black in America, it means a lot. It's a, what do you call it? I don't want to say it's an irony, but there's something that's beautiful about it and wonderful about it, and there's some things that are terrible about it. This identity around black is not something that we necessarily created ourselves, but we're made into by oppressive forces, right? So in the identity of being black in America, we do lose some of our actual, cultural connections, right? Like our lineages and our heritage. We don't have those records. We don't have those intergenerational ties, right? That say, hey, I'm Yoruba, or I'm Tikar, or I'm Mende, or I'm Mandinka, or a whole number of things, right? I'm Igbo, right? We don't have those connections directly. And so Black is something that seeks to bring us together and remind us that we are having a common experience, which is a beautiful thing to get us through the struggle. But also in Black, we do lose some of those, historical ties and connections, specifically the land as well, right? There's no place called Black land, right? So taking on an identity of being Black is like, that's cool, but where does that situate me historically and geographically beyond our struggle here, right? Before we got here, we weren't Black, right? We weren't on slave ships like, hey, this is a Black person, that's a Black person. We all were different ethnicities and had different languages. And that's how people identified, is much more based on, their customs and practices, their languages. But our identity now as Black is more about our struggle, and our resistance. So at the same time, it's beautiful, but it's also hard.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. What does being Black in America mean to you?
What being Black in America means to me? What kind of question is that? What does being Black in America mean to me? It kind of means that we still have a ways to go. And there's some people that still want to hold us down. And being Black in America, to me, nowadays means that you have to be very resilient, and you have to be very resourceful. And you have to be willing to take some chances and do some things differently, to strive and do something different with your life. Because if you want something different, some of the things that are in place in society right now, they're not going to change. It's a matter of us being able to invoke the change within ourselves about how we experience these things. That's my best answer I can give you right there.
I hear that. No, definitely respect that. A lot of we're talking about a lot of change has to happen. Not just externally but internally. So around that. And speaking of which, what would you say liberation means to you in 2021?
I thought about that earlier, and I can't. I'm not going to answer it directly. I'm going to answer it another way.
Okay.
When I look at the two of you, it validates the journey I've made in my life. So what does liberation look like to me? It looks like a world in which y'all could exist. And y'all get to determine what that looks like. But the fact that you get to determine that is everything.
I hear that. Definitely hear that. Wow. Well, I think part of that is just the fact that we have resources available and are able to at least have these conversations. And one of the big reasons I think that even we're here today as well is the Brotherhood of Elders Network, kind of bringing us together to work on this project together and move forward.